It's off-season time. Let's preview the summer ahead for the Pacers, what the GM said about it, all the key internal decisions the Pacers need to make, all the contract rules you need to know to be prepped for the Pacers offseason. All coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are officially pivoting to off-season mode. We covered the playoffs. We covered the season. We broke down the playoffs with Jay. Now we pivot to off-season mode. Got to look ahead. What's coming for the Pacers this year, especially internally with their own free agents? What did they say about it? What could it look like? How will these decisions be thought of internally? Can't wait to break it all down. A little draft stuff today, not a lot. And then we pivot to a summer of off-season podcasts here. The season review series will be back, looking back at every player. So still some stuff to talk about from the last season. And we'll look ahead at the decisions the Pacers need to make in free agency. So that series that you guys like every year, going through position by position, what the Pacers will be looking at. We'll start next week. Less draft stuff, significantly less, because they have no first-round picks at all. So get ready for all that. I know people really enjoy that kind of stuff, and I hope that some of my expertise with the cap stuff can make these interesting discussions to get you thinking about the Pacers summer. And if you don't mind for 10 seconds, I would like to say thanks for listening this season. It's a very fun year. I'm very, very fortunate that I got to cover this team in person this year a lot and for all of the playoffs, and that wouldn't be possible without you guys listening and rocking with me every day. And now you want to hear about the offseason. We're going to talk about it. Chad Buchanan spoke to us Tuesday for his exit interview, and I'm going to loop that in with all the stuff that I think matters a great deal for the Pacers in the summer. We're mostly going to look on this show at their internal players with decisions this year, not so much externally in terms of what they could add. That will be for a different show when we look at key dates and key resources the team has. And I think the biggest thing from exit interviews, and this is a no-duh kind of decision, Pascal Siakam is trying to keep him as priority one for the Pacers. They will do everything they can. They'll bust out all the stops. Tyrese Haliburton, expert recruiter, who got Ayton to sign a max here, and or was part of that at least, and has been all about that. Will do everything he can to make sure Siakam stays. If I had to guess right now, my guess would be that Pascal Siakam signs a contract with the Pacers. Already seen Shams Charania report that could be a thing that happens with the max offer. That is priority one for the Pacers, is making sure he stays on whatever deal it requires. They'll do what they can to keep him. He was great for them in the playoffs. He's a wonderful player. And that was something Rick Carlisle said. The very first thing he said in response to a question, Tyrese Haliburton was asked about it, and Chad Buchanan made it clear they would like to keep him this season. The other thing Chad Buchanan said that, of course, was important is if they're going to make additions, defense is going to matter, right? The defense in or externally will matter. But if the team is going to make additions or what they need to add to the team, he said that defense was the top thing on that list, and they will be aggressive if the opportunities present themselves. Now, here's a thing about Tony East. I used to use the word aggressive a lot. So if you wanted to dunk on me and say, you used to do this, you could. That word and the lexicon of the NBA is meaningless to me now. What does it mean to be aggressive? And what does that actually entail? Because to me, sometimes very minor moves are very aggressive. Like salary dumping Kyra Lewis to get out of the tax in mid-January, like the Pelicans did, is kind of aggressive. You got to duck the tax at some point. They did it way earlier than they had to because an opportunity presented itself. Who knows what else could have been out there if they waited till the trade deadline? That no one thinks of it that way, but I do. But anyway, usually what people are referring to that means is like a big, massive trade with lots of stuff or lots of talent involved, and I get that. And the other part of the opportunity, and I asked this question because I was personally curious about it, is the luxury tax, which is now a thing the Pacers have to think about this season. We're not getting into cap stuff specifically today. That will be on a different podcast. But it could be a factor this summer, depending on the decisions the Pacers make. And Chad said that the Simons are supportive and would pay for the tax for a title if the right move is there that gets them there. This is what I expected the answer to be, by the way. They would do that. Some of you might roll your eyes at that answer and say, I don't care. They should pay the tax every year and be as good as possible. And it's great that the Warriors have done that and the Clippers have done that. Let me tell you a little bit why you should care. If Chad is not offering lip service, Chad Buchanan is not offering lip service with that answer, and that is actually true. The Pacers are willing to pay the tax for a title team. If they avoid doing so when they aren't a title contender, their repeater tax clock starts later, which does matter because the NBA's tax rules are changing. I believe it starts this year. It might be next year. I can't remember. A lot of the CBA stuff is rolling out slowly, and it actually makes it less punitive to be just over the tax and in the tax, but barely. So you pay less in taxes, but you don't get the tax revenue from other teams. But if that is less of a change in your financial circumstance, more teams might be willing to just barely climb over. But if you do it a couple years in a row or a certain number of years within a 5-year span, the repeater tax kicks in, and then those do become more stringent taxes, and you have to pay more. And so I understand the thinking that is always said of, well, fans shouldn't care and owners should pay taxes every year and blah, blah. Like, yeah, that's true. But if it is true that an owner is more willing to pay the tax for a good team that's worthy of it, then I think fans should care a little bit that the team does it the right year for the first time, because then the repeater clock starts as late as possible, and that extends the window of how long a team is willing to spend and be as good as possible. But that's just my take on that. I get it. Regarding Obi, they loved his fit. They loved his work ethic and his culture fit with the team. And specific quote from Chad Buchanan, quote, would like to continue the relationship with Obi Toppin, which is significant heading into the summer. That's all the big picture stuff that will matter for the discussions we're going to have on this podcast. Obviously, he said all this stuff in way more detail. You should watch the whole Eggs interview if you can. They posted it on YouTube. But now let's discuss the Pacers' actual summer and their own things. This is just going to be a look at the Pacers' decisions with their own players that are coming this summer. I have 8 buckets. There's really 9 because there's the draft. To sum that up, they have the 36th pick, 49th pick, and 50th pick. Those come with no predetermined cap hits, and those could be any number of players on the second night of the draft. Really hard to get into what that could be specifically, but expect very slightly more than a minimum player if they make a pick at 36 and 2 two-way guys later. I kind of think they'll trade 1 pick, maybe 2, but I do think they should pick at 36 just because of their young guy pipeline and what that could look like if they end up making a big swing later. But let's talk about the internal players on the team, and of course, starting with Pascal Siakam. The biggest thing is them keeping him. My take on this, which may not be the most popular based on Twitter reactions, although I will say Twitter is obviously a minority, and B, the vocal loudness does not reflect everyone. I'd be more willing to pay Pascal the max than basically anyone, it sounds like, for 2 reasons. One, I think he's very good. And I think people hear max and think, oh, this guy's making the same as that other all superstar who's making the max. Like, yes, they're making the same raw dollars. But 1% of the cap is a more valuable metric to assess players. 2, the best players are underpaid. Tyrese Haliburton is underpaid, but he can't legally be paid more, if that makes sense. Like, Luka Doncic is probably worth, I'm making this up, but like $80 million in theory, but he can't be paid more than a certain amount. So he's an underpaid, air quotes, player compared to his value. So a lot of players like Siakam, who are truly worth a max and the number they would get, look like it different when you compare them to other max players. Either way, I think Siakam is worth it. 1, because he's good, and 2, because the cap is going to go up a lot. The new TV deal starts in 2025, kicks in, or at least. And if you remember when Myles Turner signed his extension, it was the rest of last season, this season, and next season, 2 years. And Kevin Pritchard talked about, right after it happened, that barrier that some people are looking ahead to for contracts ending around that time because of the way the salary cap could change with that new TV deal. Now, there's no cap spike this time like there was the last time this happened in 2016, but it's still projecting, and the NBA has it set up, that it could go up 10% every year. And if the new TV deal is as rosy as it sounds like, 10% growth every year outpaces the growth of contracts. The maximum raise allowed in contracts in the current CBA is 8%. So this is way too in the weeds, but the cap will go up a lot to the point that even with 2 players on 30% max deals, just 3 years from now, right, the summer of 2027, the cap could be $187.6 million, whereas 2 30% max players would be under $100 million. Like, it's not that stringent at all. So yes, I understand the oh my gosh shock value of seeing two giant numbers at the same time on the Pacers. That hasn't happened before. But I think Siakam's worth it, first of all. And second of all, he's tremendous, and they should be doing everything they can to keep tremendous players on their team. It's the biggest thing of their summer is keeping him. It will define the rest of their moves, and I already said this on another podcast, but if they keep him at all, regardless of what the number is, I will consider their summer at worst a C, because then they're going to be very good for, presumably, if they sign him a long time, although it could be a short deal. For those interested in the numbers, Siakam has been in the league for 8 years, which means he can get up to 30% of the salary cap. A full max contract offer for Pascal Siakam would be the exact same contract that Tyrese Haliburton is now going to get via his rookie scale extension. 5 years, currently projected at $245.34 million. That could go up or down depending on where the salary cap actually lands. Now, here's where this gets to be a thing. One, the Pacers are the only team in the NBA that can offer Pascal Siakam a 5-year contract. Every other team can only offer him 4 years. Other teams can also only offer him a deal with 5% raises, whereas the Pacers can offer 8% raises, and that's based on the first year of the deal. So the max another team, non-Pacers, could offer Pascal Siakam is 4 years, $181.89 million. For the sake of this and the rest of the summer, I'll say $182 million. Now, for a direct comparison, the Pacers, because of those raises, can offer Pascal Siakam 4 years, $189.5 million. So that's where, if you are he's not worth the max guy, this is where you can find your happy medium to discuss this with other people. Your argument would be, well, they should offer him 5 years, $200, for example. That's more than any other team can offer him financially. That isn't the same annual value that other teams can offer him. It's lower, but it's the 5th year and guarantees him a 5th year of more guaranteed money than he could get elsewhere. His max value per year on a 4-year deal is like 45.4 something million over the life of a 5-year contract. That's $227.36 million. So 5 for $228 is still not a max contract for Siakam, but is more than he could get even per year from any other team. So there's a lot of ways that there's a middle ground available if negotiations are to happen. But if I'm the Pacers, losing him for nothing is an absolute disaster, catastrophe. They made the conference finals so they could grit their teeth and say it was worth it. And that's true to an extent, but obviously so much worse. Indescribably massive gap worse than having him on the team. So I expect that he will get a lot of money. And I think the Pacers should be willing to pay him whatever it takes to keep him. And that is my stance on that. But those are the numbers involved in this situation. Pacers can offer as low as the minimum and as high as that 5 for $245.34. So can other teams. Cap space will matter. What teams have cap space will matter. We'll get to that when we look ahead at the whole NBA's summer with the cap space numbers, key dates, all that for the Pacers this summer. But those are the numbers you need to know, and I think the Pacers should be willing to pay him whatever it takes, even if that's not the popular take. I think that is what makes the most sense. Lots of other players to get to: Obi Toppin, Andrew Nembhard, TJ McConnell, and so many more to get to here. Some extensions, some other stuff. Let's get to all that coming up. Before we talk about those guys and their summers for the Pacers, though, really quickly need to talk to you guys about FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA. The Mavs battling still with the Wolves, and then the finals with the Celtics. And the NHL still rocking FanDuel. It's giving you a shot to bring home a huge win of your own during the playoffs right now. New customers on FanDuel can get $150 in bonus bets. How about that? With any winning $5 bet. $150 that you can bet on money lines, on player props, on spreads, and so much more. But to get that offer, you got to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every shot count and get $150 with any winning $5 bet. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on Locked On Pacers, thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. Locked On Celtics. Get one more listen in from John Corrales about the Pacers-Celtics series. Celtics, a lot of respect for the Pacers on the way out, despite beating them in a sweep. It'll be weird to see how that series gets remembered versus what it was in reality, but such is history, such is life. I wasn't sure where I wanted to go second here, but I guess I'll just roll through the free agents first. Siakam is the first one. The next highest paid player who's entering free agency for the Pacers is Doug McDermott. Doug McDermott is a free agent. I can't imagine his value. Last year he made $14 million. He's not even worth close to that anymore. Wasn't in the playoff rotation until late. he might be a minimum player now. Those specialist types who can't really defend at his age. It's hard to say, though. I'm looking through some contracts from last summer, from going through some vets or from specialist types or some shooters, right? You could make the argument that there's more for him out there than maybe the minimum, but not by much. Like Seth Curry got 2 years, $8 million from Brooklyn, and Kevin Love got 2 years, $3.9 million. But like also Eric Gordon got the minimum, and Kelly Oubre, that was a different scenario, but he got the minimum. Danny Green, like he might just be a minimum guy. I don't think he's out of the league anymore, but maybe the Pacers could want him back just for the depth. I mean, he'd probably be their 12th guy next year, just with health and young guys getting better. But if he's willing to take the minimum to stay, maybe that's something. He has full bird rights, so there's like some goofy sign and trade stuff that could happen. Who knows? I'm not going to make a prediction on this one necessarily, because maybe they just value the roster spot more, since they're going to have to fit a draft pick in somewhere if they make one. But his scenario, just big picture, I'm not going to go through the pros and cons of every player in full detail. I'll do full podcasts on those. Hard to say. Non-zero sign and trade value, I think that something like $4 million per year tops is where Doug McDermott's summer could go. Next highest paid free agent for the Pacers, and the most interesting player of the summer to me, not the most important, that's Siakam without a doubt, is Obi Toppin. Obi Toppin, a restricted, let's be clear here, restricted free agent. If the Pacers want to keep Obi Toppin, assuming he does not get an insane bananas offer from another team, they'll keep him. They can match offers. If it's another team submits him an offer sheet, and if they make him a restricted free agent, they can keep him. It's that easy. It's that simple. That's great news. That's the starting point. If the Pacers want Obi Toppin back, they can have him. What interesting dynamic here. So he didn't start for the Knicks 2 years ago, which matters because qualifying offers, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but this is important details. There's something called starter criteria, specifically for lottery picks. And if you don't meet it by either not being a starter or not playing enough minutes across 2 seasons, your qualifying offer goes down. And Obi Toppin didn't start for the Knicks 2 years ago and didn't start for the Pacers this year, and also did not reach the minutes requirement, meaning his qualifying offer is actually lower than someone of his usual pick spot at pick 38. His qualifying offer this season is $7.74, little over that, million, which that is the offer the Pacers have to make him a restricted free agent. His old qualifying offer as just the 8th pick in his draft was higher, and was high enough that, like, if negotiations go poorly, maybe he just signs it and just plays out a 1-year deal where he's untradeable, and that's not great. This one's lower, which means it's less likely he would sign it, and likely he would want to at least negotiate with the Pacers or other teams. He's got a power. He's with the CAA, big agency, so fun stuff going on there, which is always exciting in these things. So what is he worth, right? That's going to be what the question actually is, because clearly, as Buchanan said, they like him. He fits in with them culturally. He fits in with them basketball-wise. He didn't end the playoffs great defensively, but he played well enough offensively to stay on the floor for every playoff game. He played all 82. Very good player, very valuable. Better than I thought he'd be, too. The shot was huge, became a better rebounder, right? So there's a couple questions to ask with him. What is he worth, right? What is that player actually worth? Just for some examples, to do the same thing that I did with McDermott last summer. Let's start with a shooter type with not so great defense. George Niang. He got 3 years, $25.5 million. That's $8.5 million per year. Joe Ingles, veteran, not as good as Obi. He got 2 years, $22 million. That's $11 million per year. I think Obi's better than both those players I just named, to be clear. Grant Williams. And remember, Grant Williams didn't have the best year, especially from a PR perspective, but it's important to remember what the perception of Grant Williams was last year. And he had decent playoffs. He was young. He was good. He was coming off of his rookie deal into restricted free agency. This is probably the most comparable player to me, and probably a good starting point for Pacers and Toppin negotiations. Grant Williams last summer got 4 years, $53.3 million. That is $13.3 million per year. You adjust that to a rising salary cap environment. Maybe something like 4 for $55 makes sense. PJ Washington, who's obviously has the best PR ever right now. He's playing amazing in the postseason, but what he was thought of last summer, it took a while for him to sign. He got 3 years, $46.5 million. That's $15.5 million. He was probably thought of a little better than Obi is now last summer. So that settles into me as somewhere between like 12 to 15 range per year per Toppin. So that would be my estimation, with a rising cap reality also a factor. Now, There's another question with Obi that isn't what is he worth. It's how much are you willing to keep him to then not play Jarris Walker? And they could play Jarris Walker at other positions, 5, 3, even 4 if they find other ways to do that. But then who else isn't playing? Is it Ben Mathurin? Is it Ben Shepherd? Is it a center? Like that is an interesting factor for them to think about with all of their additions or potential additions this summer. But I think Jarris should be a factor that they consider. And Obi, who naturally I think plays the same position as Jarris, that has to be a consideration. And if they do re-sign Obi, that signals at least some sort of thinking with Jarris. I asked Chad Buchanan about Walker in his ex interview. You can hear that again in the full thing. The other thing is, you don't. I talked about top agents earlier. Like you don't want to piss off any agency, but especially that one. And you want to play the restricted free agency game, right? PJ Washington signed with the Hornets after a very long restricted free agency game last summer, right? I'm going to try to find the exact date. I should have pulled this tab up earlier, but it didn't end up hurting anything there to do that, but you squeeze him out. The cap space goes away. There's only one place for him to sign. That's fine. The official PJ Washington sign was August 29th last year, right? That's almost 2 months into free agency for PJ Washington. And you do that and you get a better deal because the guy can't go out and get another offer and they can only negotiate with you, really. I will be curious what this looks like for the Pacers and Toppin. My guess would be that he stays. He played well. He's a good fit. He's a good dude. I really enjoyed being around him in my interactions with Obi Toppin. But there is a lot of questions about because he's a restricted free agent, because he plays the same position as the guy they just drafted, all sorts of factors that make this one at least interesting to me. One more free agent, plus some extensions, including a guy who just crushed it in the playoffs. What does it look like? What does it mean? What do the Pacers do with all that in the summer? Let's get to all of that to close out today's show. And we're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Wolves. They're still alive. Still alive. Big win for Minnesota, for not only themselves to keep playing and get another home game, but also for me so I can watch NBA games before the finals, because there's going to be a huge gap between series after how quick the Pacers one ended. Okay, last free agent for the Pacers is James Johnson, who's coming off a minimum deal. I laugh because there's nothing to consider here. Not because he should be gone and they shouldn't want him back, but if he wants to come back, he's a minimum guy, and that would be it. That would be it. If the Pacers have a spot for him, great. I know this sounds silly, and people just say, why not be an assistant coach or blah, blah, blah. And like, I hear that, like, he doesn't play that much, if at all. There is, to me, value. Like, first of all, veterans are obviously valuable. We've known that in the NBA for forever, especially one like him who has everybody's back and is tough and no one's messing with him. Like, that's all great. I think there is legitimate value to some extent of that guy who's being your coach and has your back, who like practices with you and goes through scrimmages and is like a player, right? That's just the respect added value to me. I don't know how much to put on it. And it's not, fans always say, why need an assistant coach? Well, I guess the roster spot could be used differently and perhaps more constructively. I don't think so, though. Veterans are very valuable to have. And either way, if it takes up a roster spot, so be it. So we'll see. I mean, last year they didn't have him and they wanted him and then signed him in December. So we'll see what happens. There's not much to ask about that. It's just they have a roster spot. Do they want him? Does he want to keep playing? If not, we'll see there. So that's all the free agents for sure for the Pacers: Siakam, McDermott, Toppin, and James Johnson. All of their two-way guys are free agents: Quentin Jackson, Isaiah Wong, Oscar Tshiebwe. I'll get into them at a later show. Let's do the extension stuff now, or guys who have other decisions hanging over them this summer. The biggest salaried player who is contract extension eligible this summer is TJ McConnell. The guys who make more: Tyrese Haliburton, not extension eligible; Myles Turner, not extension eligible; and Aaron Eastman, not extension eligible. That gets us to McConnell, who is now 3 years into the 4-year deal he signed in 2021, meaning he is extension eligible, starting officially on August 6th. Although that was a COVID year deal, they usually do some mapping with the years. It could be earlier than that, but whatever. This offseason, before next season starts, TJ McConnell will be extension eligible for the Pacers. He also has a non-fully guaranteed contract next year. Let's get this out of the way because people will think of this wrong. $5 million of TJ McConnell's $9.3 million is guaranteed. First of all, he's just worth $9.3 million in general. But second of all, you view waiving him as saving $9.3 million. You have to view waiving him as saving $4.3 million. And then you have to figure out, can you do better with $4.3 million? Because you're going to spend the $5 million anyway, than you can with TJ McConnell on your team? No, not even close. So that's just a no-brainer. That will be a guaranteed thing. I believe the date on that is the night after the draft, 2 days after. So June 28th, because it's a 2-night draft, but that doesn't matter. I believe that's a lock. He's also extension eligible. With the new extension rules with 140% raises, this would start in 2025-26. TJ McConnell's eligible for a 4-year extension that can be up to, not exactly this number, up to $58.7 million. It would start at $13 million next year. I don't really know what to make of TJ McConnell's value, but maybe it's that. Maybe he's one of the best backup point guards in the league. Maybe it's that. Who knows at his age, though, exactly what the Pacers are thinking of him. Andrew Nembhard, certainly a very valuable guard on their team as well. Ben Mathurin. But he was sensational. Like TJ McConnell saved their season at times when Haliburton was hurt. As a bench player down the stretch, he was great in the postseason. So he has immense value to the Pacers, right? There's no discussions going into next season about should he or should he not be in the rotation. He's going to be. He should be at least. He was tremendous. So what value does that have? Now let's go back to last summer again. Let's do some comps. Kobe White. Remember, this is what they were thought of last year, not this year, because Kobe White had a tremendous season. Kobe White got 3 years, $36 million. That's $12 million per season. Dennis Schroeder got 2 years, $25.4 million, $12.7 million per season, for example. Gabe Vincent, after his awesome run to the finals, got 3 years, $33 million, which is $11 million per year. And the last comp I had was Trey Jones, who got 2 years, $20 million. That's $10 million per year. Those are some good backups or low-end starter guys. Kobe White ended up being more than that, but Trey Jones started a few times. Schroeder started with Toronto a decent amount. So in that range, makes sense, low tens, but again, rising cap environment. He's good. He's better than those guys. So maybe like 2 for 25, 3 for, something like that. Perhaps that could be numbers that make sense, but it comes down to what McConnell wants, what the Pacers want there. And he's a great player. They need him, or at least they needed him last year. But how he fits in with the dynamics of their depth and their team is what will kind of lead into this. And McConnell, as a free agent next year, could be his last big contract, but he will have full bird rights and could potentially just re-sign with the Pacers at that time. So very interesting summer coming for TJ McConnell. The next highest paid player who's extension eligible is Jalen Smith. After TJ McConnell, the next 2 salaries are Bennedict Mathurin and Jarris Walker. Neither of them are extension eligible. Jalen Smith is. I didn't run the numbers on his extension because it doesn't make sense to me why it would happen. I at one point had them somewhere in here, and for some reason I have completely buried them or lost them in the side of my notes, which is just a bunch of gobbledygook of numbers. Whatever a 40% raise in his current deal is would be the first year value. I guess I could type that in really quickly with 8% raises. So that would be a deal that starts in 25-26 at $7.5 million. And could last as much as 4 years. So 4 years, something like $36 million, I believe, is what the max would be for Jalen Smith extension. I don't know why the Pacers or Jalen Smith would pursue that at this particular time. The Pacers have front court depth. They have young front court depth, and Jalen Smith was not in their playoff rotation. I also don't get why Jalen Smith, who didn't play in the postseason and didn't close the season as strong as he maybe wanted, would want to extend unless he just got an absurd money offer. So the real question about Jalen Smith's summer is not about the extension, about his player option, which was a big part of negotiations, presumably with him, the summer where they had a hard ceiling on what they could offer him contractually. Will he or won't he pick this up? $5.4 million player option for Jalen Smith this season. Kind of a key part of their summer. They're spending what their team looks like, roster spots. During the season, right, it felt like a lock that he would opt out of this deal because he was playing so well that it thought, oh, he could get more than that. I was doing comps on centers who got paid more last year, like Jock Landale's per year deal and Mo Wagner and all that. And then he did not play well to close the season or didn't play very hardly at all in the postseason. So what do you make of that? If he's the regular season player again, you think, yeah, that's a guy worth having for $5.4 million. If he's the playoff guy, maybe not so much. So it's a player option. What the Pacers want doesn't matter. What Jalen Smith wants does matter. That could be money. That could be a starting spot. That could be a longer deal at slightly less value on a different team. And so this one's hard to say, right? Because he'd be an unrestricted free agent if he opts out. Pacers have no control over that. if he goes out and figures out that he could get 3 years, $15 million from someone to be their backup center and guarantee himself playing time and get less money next year, but more money in the future, maybe he wants that. If some young team, the Wizards or I'm thinking of other young teams, or I can't think of any that need a center off the top of my head fast enough. The Wizards, for example, say, hey, you could start for us at a cheapo number. Maybe that's appealing just for the opportunity to start and earn more money that way. So it kind of will depend on what Smith wants and what's out there for him elsewhere on what happens with that player option. It's really hard to say. Pacers have no say in that. Because, again, during the season, it felt like a lock he would opt out. Now, not so sure. So at his age, it's about more than the finances, right? I think it's close, but my official prediction I'll make right now, May 30th, not June, May 30th, is that he will opt in, and he officially becomes extension eligible on July 6th. Okay, the next highest paid player who is extension eligible this summer, Isaiah Jackson is not, Ben Shepherd is not. That leaves us with 2 players left on the hierarchy of guys under contract for the Pacers next year, and both of them have interesting contract stuff this summer. This is a big one that people have been talking about. Someone tweeted something like just totally guessing about this yesterday that kind of blew up. Andrew Nembhard is extension eligible this summer, which is fascinating. He signed a 4-year deal when he was drafted in the second round. It's been 2 years. There it is. He's extension eligible. So let's start with this. People have talked about this. Oh, they got to try. They might lose him for nothing in 2 years. I don't think there's a reality where the Pacers lose Nembhard for nothing, because next offseason, they could decline the team option on the 4th year of his contract, and then he would be a restricted free agent. So they could negotiate with exclusive rights and keep him that way. So if they want to keep Nembhard beyond next year, they could do it, right? They have the means to do that, and that's great for the Pacers. He's a great player. Everyone knows I'm very high on him, and he had a great close to the postseason. What about right now? What about an extension right now that would kick in the 25-26 season where they theoretically decline that team option now? So the trouble is a veteran extension. There's 2 ways it can happen. Either 140% raise on the final year or the most recent year of a player's salary, or a 140% bump over the league average salary. Josh Richardson most famously signed that one. It's called the Josh Richardson extension among some cap dorks. The reason that number is relevant is a 140% raise over Nembhard's current salary is meaningless. He would never sign that. But 140% raise over the league average salary could potentially be interesting here. The problem is we don't know the league average salary for next year. So telling you exactly what Andrew Nembhard's extension value could be is impossible, because he's not even extension eligible until, I can't remember the exact date. I typed this somewhere. I pulled up tabs and now I can't find it. But late July, which is before the season starts, is all the important parts there. July 22nd is the day that Andrew Nembhard would be extension eligible. So the current, right now, estimated league average salary from the NBA is $11.958 million. Next year it'll be higher. So I'm going to use $12 million just to make this easy math, but it will probably end up a little higher than that. A 4-year extension for Andrew Nembhard would start at $16.8 million, and with 8% raises would be 4 years, $75.26 million. Fascinating. A good 2-way starter guard at just under $20 million per year. I think that's close. So the bet would be, 1, the Pacers want to do that. And 2 would be, does Nembhard think, well, if I wait, I had this great close to the postseason. If I wait a year, am I going to have a great year? It'd be worth more than that. And then they have to do restricted free agency to keep me at that number because they don't want to lose me. Like, that's the bet he would make. And he would be eligible for this exact same extension next summer too. So I think that this one's tricky just because of the bet on yourself element. And TJ McConnell, for example, like, if the Pacers do not agree to an extension with him and he signs elsewhere next year, Nembhard could be in line for a much bigger role. Like, would that entice him to sign a different contract next summer with the Pacers? So this actually could make sense. Like, I think the extension is high enough that it could entice Nembhard to stay at that number, especially a guy who's just been on a minimum basically deal the first few years of his career. But he's got a chance to make more than that as a good 2-way guard. And I think some people might think I'm overdoing this and I'm just much higher on him, but I think good starters, $15 million's like the floor. Aaron Nesmith signed 3 for $33 last summer. And first of all, I thought that was a steal right away. But second of all, remember, like, we were talking about this on this podcast last year. Like, is Aaron Nesmith going to be in the rotation? How would you how would you do this if you're the Pacers? And I said all summer, I'd be making decisions with him in it and then working from there. But it wasn't obvious, right? Some people were talking about, if Jarris and Obi are in and Mathurin and McConnell and Nembhard, everybody, like, is Aaron Nesmith out of the rotation? And obviously he was way better than that and was a deserving starter, but he's underpaid, right? Solid starters or more are worth $15 million per year at least. And so I think with Nembhard, that's going to be a fascinating thing this summer. He is extension eligible. I'm not sure where that actually shakes out. The final player who is an interesting summer ahead is Kendall Brown. Kendall Brown has a non-guaranteed contract at $2.1 million, non-guaranteed until opening night, where it becomes $250,000 guaranteed, which is a tiny number. This one usually comes down to what Kendall Brown finds on the open market, because his guaranteed date is after Summer League, for example. Like maybe the Pacers just bring him in, keep him around, see how he looks in Summer League, and maybe he plays great. And they're like, great, we'll keep you as our 15th guy and keep developing you. Like, he's still 20 years old. It's crazy how a guy who's been in the league that long is still that young. He does not, he turned 21 May 11th. I didn't realize his birthday was this month. He's 21. Next regular season will end and he will still be 21 years old. So maybe they want to use the roster spot in a different way than that. Whatever. They have the 36th pick. I could understand that. I don't think they would beat themselves up over that. Like, he's still young. They really liked him. They traded stuff to get him in that draft 2 years ago. So don't be surprised if he sticks around for the summer and is like a part of Summer League or maybe even a part of training camp so they can evaluate where he's at and if he's worth keeping around. And then decisions are made from there. Remember Dwayne Washington, for example, played Summer League for the Pacers 2 summers ago on a non-guaranteed deal. He was waived. I'm not sure how that would have gone if the DeAndre Ayton stuff wasn't going on, but still, this has happened in reality before. So we will see what shakes out there. It might depend what happens elsewhere on the roster and the roster spot count for the Pacers. But I think Summer League is the key thing to watch when it comes to Kendall Brown's guarantee and free agency. All right, that's all the numbers. That's all the details I can give you today at a high level. Siakam and Toppin for sure will get individual podcasts breaking down the pros, the cons, and what I expect to happen for them in free agency. And then I might lump in a McDermott, Nembhard, McConnell show to get into more weedy details on those guys. The other people, probably not. So what happens now going forward? It's off-season time. Some planning coming. The coming weeks, you guys will have to tell me either via the comments on this or tweeting at me how much draft stuff you actually want. My favorite player for the Pacers in this draft just decided to go back to school yesterday, which was Coleman Hawkins. The opt-out date is done for players, so they can't go back to school anymore. There's some international deadlines that are later, but in general, we know the field now. So you guys will have to tell me. So tomorrow, actually, what we're going to do is the first of the many positional free agency previews, I think. We'll do the point guard one. I know a lot of comments are coming. Oh, why? They don't need a point guard. Well, you'll see why it matters when we go through all these episodes. And then for the 3 weeks leading up to the draft, there'll be a mix of player season recaps, positional free agency previews, player free agency previews, and a sprinkle of draft stuff. Maybe some mailbags, maybe some stuff looking back at the season that I want to do. And then the week of the draft, we'll really dive into all that. So I hope that's a good offseason plan. If you guys have something else you want in there, just let me know. Happy to do it. Really looking forward to this. This will be a very fascinating summer for the Pacers. I'm on Twitter at Tony R. East, and the show is there at Locked On Pacers. It's the best way to reach me. Thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you tomorrow.